Can you hear me? No? Yes, you can hear me. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Andrea Barlow. I'm the chair of the El Paso County Master Plan Advisory Committee, and we're holding a special meeting today to look at the progress that has been made on the master plan and have a visioning workshop. We have representatives from Halsell Levine Associates here who have been the consultants who have been leading this process. Our members of the committee that are present, I'll ask them to introduce themselves in a second. We have a couple of people missing, but I do believe we have a quorum. So as I indicated, I'm the chair. I'm Andrea Barlow with NES, and I'm here as a planning professional on this committee. Sarah?
I'm Sarah Jack, and I'm a member of the Planning Commission.
I'm Tom Bailey. I'm another one of the members of the Planning Commission.
I'm Mark. You hear me? I'm Mark Volchev, and I'm the representative for Commissioner Stan Vanderwerf's district.
I'm Becky Fuller. I'm a small business advocate, and I'm also a planning commissioner.
Tim Trowbridge, Planning Commission.
Thank you. On that note, I'll pass it over to Craig, and he's going to introduce Halsell Levine.
First off, Madam Chair, I just want to thank everybody for attending. I notice we have some Planning Commission members in the audience as well. This is intended to be a joint work session with the Master Plan Advisory Committee, which is sitting up here on the dais with their smiling faces, as well as the Planning Commission. So we did notify this as a meeting for both entities to make sure that we had adequate public notice provided. This is kind of a turning of the corner, so to speak, in the process of developing our new master plan. Up until this point, we've been mining a lot of data, collecting a lot of survey responses, but this is sort of, again, the turning of the corner towards visioning and what we want to be when we grow up as a county. So it's kind of an exciting time. Again, appreciate everybody's attendance. But I am going to turn it over to John Halsell with Halsell Levine to go through the workshop presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Craig. Again, my name is John Halsell with Halsell Levine Associates, and with me is Sean Tapia of our firm as well. We also have representatives here from HB&A and Tetra Tech, who are some of the other folks that are on our comprehensive plan projects team, and they're covering different aspects of the assignment. So the purpose of this afternoon's meeting, it's really less of a presentation than it is a working session. And what I mean by that, as Craig indicated, we're sort of at a turning point in the planning process, or a pivotal point in the planning process. And if you remember early on, I described any planning process at its very essence of having to do three things, and that is establishing where we are right now, where it is we want to go, and what do we have to do to get there. That's in essence what a plan and planning process has to do. So the first part of that is where are we now, all right? And the where are we now is culminated in what we call an existing conditions report, and I will be going over that very briefly today, not in detail. We're just going to orient you to the document so that you can look at it on your own time over the next week or two and get us any comments you have. The existing conditions report does not contain recommendations. It is not an exhaustive inventory of everything in the county, but it is meant to frame the context of what is going on right now, a summary of all the outreach that we heard from the residents and business owners and others that we've talked to over the last several months, and it provides, if you will, a snapshot in time of El Paso County right now. And it begins to highlight and articulate some of the things we have to consider as a group as we develop the plan in the future upcoming months. So it's an interim document, not meant to be adopted. There are no recommendations in it, but it is the one place where we sort of pull together a lot of data, a lot of input, a lot of feedback. So I'll be going over that. The other primary purpose of today's working session is to begin to discuss goals and objectives. Now, later on in the process, we will be designing visioning exercises to bring out to the public, to the masses, to everybody, to get their input. This is one of those internal working sessions where we're going to begin to pick your brains on visions, goals, things like that, to help us formulate what we want to bring to the public to get their feedback on. So this is a working session. The material we're going to be reviewing isn't going out to the public yet. We are working on it with you to get it into the shape it needs to be and to bring it to the public to get their feedback. So this is a working session, internal, with 3 groups: staff of the consulting team, Plan Commission, and the steering committee. Those are the 3 groups that are going through materials now. So everything we're going over today, once it's refined, will get posted on the website, be made available to the public, and we'll have outreach activities for people to weigh in, but that's not today. So apologize to anybody in the audience who my back is toward, but this is a working session. So I just want to make sure we sort of understand the purpose of today's workshop. So overall, the planning process, while I said it's basically 3 things, it's these 9 steps for this project. The first one is project initiation and outreach. 2 is community outreach and engagement. 3 is market and demographic analysis. 4 is existing conditions analysis. That all is what is contained in the ECR. I'll go over that very briefly today to, again, orient you to the document, not to go over the document in detail. Right now, we are between steps 4 and 5, all right? We are coming into the concluding components of establishing that snapshot in time of the existing conditions, and we're doing that as a foundation to launch into the vision and goal setting phase of the project. So we're going to be highlighting what we've developed for step 4 very quickly, and we're going to be doing some initial exercises to begin to help craft some materials for step 5. Once we have finalized step 5 in terms of working documents, we then can bring those out to the larger county community. And then we will go into steps 6, 7, and 8, which is to begin to look at some of these place type and key plan components, county-wide plans and policies, implementation, and then finally the plan adoption process. So again, we're in between 4 and 5 right now. Wrapping up 4, starting 5. So what I'm going to do very quickly is go through the existing conditions report. Sean, if you can pull that up on here as a PDF. Right. So again, to reiterate, this is not quote unquote public yet. Anybody in the meeting can see this, but it's a working draft internal for discussion. In any process, there are things that you do to get things ready for public consumption. You don't want working drafts out there because people might say, well, what about this and what about that? And then you're in a position to say, well, yeah, we already know we're changing that. Wait till the public draft comes out. So this is sort of that watching the sausage being made. You've got to go through these ruminations internally. We've been meeting for the past 4.5 hours just this morning with staff to go over this page by page and the vision and the goals. And we've already made a number of corrections we're going to be making going forward, in addition to whatever comments we get from you. So this is a working draft. We already know there's going to be changes to this before it goes out. So again, this is just a working draft, but I want to walk through that very quickly. So again, so this is what it looks like. It's an 11 by 17 document. Double-sided, it's about 70 pages long, covers a lot of different material. And again, the purpose of the existing conditions report, like for instance, we cover land use and development, we cover transportation. Well, you had transportation plans done in 2018 and 2016 that were super entailed, took months and months, if not more than multiple years to develop, hundreds of thousands of dollars. Any one of these topics could be its own book. Any one of these chapters could be 100, 200 pages long, and you could explore these to the nth degree. The purpose of this is not to develop a data atlas or an exhaustive list of everything. It's meant to try to capture El Paso now so we have an understanding of what it is we have to work with as we develop the plan. So it's meant to sort of capture where are we now. So I'll go through that. So like I said, this does not get adopted. There are no recommendations in here. It provides data, it provides feedback, it identifies issues, it identifies opportunities that we need to collectively consider as we develop the plan, all right? So this is an interim document, it's on file with the county, it'll be posted on the website. Once we're done with it, it'll be done in the next couple of weeks, refining it. So I'll go through this now. So again, these are all the chapters or sections that are in this document. An introduction that talks about the purpose of the plan, the intent of this document, past planning efforts, we go into the existing development setting, transportation and mobility, community facilities and infrastructure, military base compatibility, recreation and tourism, community health and sustainability, resiliency and hazard mitigation. So there are sort of 3 different pieces that went into the development of this working document. One is all the outreach that we've engaged to date. We've engaged approximately 3,500 people over the last several months as part of this process. So we're a third of the way through the process, and we've already engaged about 3,500 people. So we're on track to have some pretty good numbers. We also did a very detailed market and demographic economic analysis of office, restaurant, retail, residential, industry to sort of see where the trends are now and over the next 20 years to see how the county should position itself when they start developing a plan. Because economic development and land use is a big deal. Those recommendations have to be grounded in market realities. They can't be hallucinating, okay? So we did a detailed market and demographic report that was submitted to staff for review several weeks ago. They went through it with a fine-tooth comb. You've got some excellent editors on staff. They refined a couple things, got their comments back to us a few weeks ago. We've addressed all those, refined it, made those revisions, and incorporated that economic development, market, and demographic assessment into this report. So now they're not two separate reports, they're integrated into this one report. So as you go through it, you'll see all those three different things. So introduction, again, what I'm going to do here, because we want to get to more of a discussion about the vision. What I'm going to go through here is just walk you through the document very quickly. I'm not going to go into 80 double-sided 11 by 17 pages of text. We'd be here for 2 days. But I would ask that you do go through this on your own or as a group, get your comments back to staff in the next week or two. We'll incorporate those comments and get a draft up online for people to look at. We go over the purpose of this document and the master plan, the planning process that was undertaken. We outline all the community outreach that we've conducted. That'll be detailed here, sort of a little call-out box. Everything we did to notify people, engage people, the events we conducted and who attended. We also sort of frame out the different places that are in El Paso County. We look at a lot of the different plans that you've done, not only that you've done, relevant plans the state has done, some of the small area plans, states, the municipalities within the county have done that may impact county with regard to annexation or growth or land use. So we've looked at tons and tons of different plans, and we've looked at several different small areas throughout El Paso County. We did a detailed examination, like I said, of market, economics, and demographic to find out what your population projections are. No surprise here, a key need for doing this plan is you're projected to grow by several 100,000 people over the next 30 years. So gone are the days we can sort of put our head in the sand and hope that things go well. We have to plan for that level of growth because that train is coming down the tracks, and we have to manage it so we're not just reacting to what happens to us. So detailed demographics, age distribution, household age, income levels by household, race and ethnicity, what the makeup is now, what it's projected to be going forward, employment categorization by sector. We look at past planning efforts. Here's some of the small area plans that we examined as well. There are several different small area plans that we looked at. The ones on this map include Black Forest, Eastern County, Elcott, Falcon, Peyton, Fountain Valley, Highway 94, South Central, Southwestern, Tri-Lakes, and Ute Pass. In addition to these small area plans, we've also looked at, like I said, other plans from the county, water, transportation, utility, energy, Colorado Springs, other municipalities, the state, military bases. One of the first things we have to do is mine anything anybody else has examined, and that's what we've already done. I won't go through all of that, but that's all in here. We looked at existing development settings. We're not doing a parcel by parcel. If you're going to inventory land use in a neighborhood, you can do parcel by parcel. This address, this is the land use, this corner has this on this lot. You can't do parcel by parcel inventory on 2,100 square miles. You simply can't do it. So we categorize land uses by sort of land use character areas or development types, rural centers, managed lands, that's like state-owned land or military bases, large lot residential or ranchettes, suburban development, employment or industrial areas, mixed-use center, regional centers, unincorporated pockets, and undeveloped areas. So we've categorized these into those 10 different land use types, and we've mapped them. And then we describe each one of them and where they're located. Again, we have to understand the physical, how the county is evolving and has evolved in terms of development. We also took a look at your zoning ordinance. The reason we have to look at zoning and land use together is zoning is what regulates what comes out of the ground, and sometimes planning and zoning don't align, and they should going forward. So I won't go through all those districts. We took a detailed market assessment of different market areas within the county to take a look at things like your office market compared to the county, compared to other counties, compared to the state, to see where El Paso County lines up. What we're trying to get at is, do you have market potential moving forward, and what is the trajectory of these different service sectors? whether it be industrial, office, retail, residential, what have you. So we do these office trends by those different analyses. We do the same thing for industrial use and development, same for retail. And then we do all that comparison to get a better existing snapshot, if you will, as to the potential and constraints, potential oversaturation of El Paso County relative to its market area, the county region, the front line in the country. We also take a look at detailed examination of housing conditions. What types of housing are provided? What types of housing do you need? What types of housing are provided in what areas of the county? The reason we have to do this is if we're projected to see a large population increase, and we can see what the projected demographic and age distribution is going to be over the next 20 years, you can fairly carefully align whether or not you are or are not meeting housing demand now and going forward. And if that's the case, we can expect to know what type of housing development will likely be proposed by a developer to meet that market condition. So we look at multifamily, we look at market rate multifamily, and then we look at some of the existing housing programs that exist. In each one of these sections at the end, you will see key findings summary of existing development setting. You'll see key findings that we came up with and key findings or comments that people provided during the outreach phase of engaging 3,400 people. There's a variety of different opinions, but if there were themes of comments, we put them in here. So you can see what the general population was referring to. Yes?
All right, this is like drinking from a fire hose. Does anyone else feel that way? So is this all going to make sense? Because it feels like you're just slamming through this and there's a lot of information.
There is. So yeah, so there is a lot of information here. So again, but that's what I'm saying. I just want to orient you to what's in this document. This could be a 6-hour-long meeting just to go through this. Like I said, we've been going through this for hours with staff. It's data. They're not recommendations, it's data. So you guys got to get in it and read through it, okay? So we want to go through today is to start talking about how we're framing some of the visionary components going forward. But this is a catalog, an atlas, if you will, of existing conditions. And we think it's important to record this at the beginning of the process. So my purpose today is to orient you to what's in this document, but not spend 2 hours going through page by page, everything and explaining what's in it. It's pretty straightforward, but it's cataloging everything we've researched. So it's a lot. I'm just trying to lay out what's in this document.
Sure. And then are you going to be asking us to be visioning based on the data in here today?
No. The visioning
Okay.
will not be based off of this data. This is just, what we want to talk about is when we get into the visioning, we want to talk about some of the issues and priorities you think the county should be looking at going forward. Some of that is going to be regardless of the detail, the data that is in here. It may get tweaked over time as we refer to this, but we want to start shaping some of the visionary components of the plan. That's why we're just working on developing these materials.
Okay.
So you'll have the next couple of weeks to review this in more detail, either by yourselves or with staff. There's no recommendations in here, it's just data. But we want to start getting your sense of what you think we should be prioritizing when we start looking at some of the goals going forward.
Okay, thank you.
So
Actually,
I know this is a lot. I'm just trying to orient you to the document. It is.
And I have a follow-up from that. So when you talk about the key findings for existing development setting, and I'm assuming there's going to be other key findings, have you used those in any way to come to your vision components?
The visionary components right now are broken down sort of logically by category: land use and development, transportation. So regardless of what came out of here, we've broken those down into the categories that we think the plan has to be structured around.
Okay.
Right? So again, you could spend 3 hours just talking about a housing report, but I don't know that would be an efficient use of time. So I was just sort of saying, this is where we have the housing chapter that details the housing conditions in the county right now. There's no recommendations.
I think the challenge is that we all sat down and we're seeing this for the first time.
Right.
And it's a lot to absorb.
Yeah, and that's why I just want to orient you as to
Okay.
what's in here, so that when you look at it, you'll have a sense of what it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
I trust you. I'm going to go.
Okay.
I'm going to roll with it.
Yeah, so I'm just trying to outline the document. I'm not going into the detail of what's in the document, okay?
Madam Chair, the point is, we're going to have a much more detailed conversation about it as an advisory committee.
Right.
After this, Mr. Halsey is just trying to give you the structure of it so that you understand what you're looking at when you actually do go through the process of doing a detailed review.
Right, yeah. So again, I know I'm going through it quickly. I'm just trying to orient you as to what's in this document, not the detail of it. So again, transportation and mobility is a key part of any or comprehensive plan. So you've got land use and development, and you've got transportation. Those are some of the biggest pieces. A key part of this chapter of the document you'll recognize, you've got 2 recent transportation plans that were done, one in 2018, one in 2016. Very robust, very detailed, very heavy lifts and efforts. So a year later, we're not looking to reinvent it for this. We need to highlight what is most relevant in those plans and documents that were recently done and carry them into this to provide context. We want to make sure that this aligns with those plans. So what was important in those plans is carried into this. So when you review this, know that we're not reinventing the wheel, no pun intended. This literally is transportation stuff that came out of those 2 very recent county plans, all right? So this chapter is largely reflective of 2 studies the county just did, okay? The next one is community facilities and infrastructure. Community facilities and infrastructure can cover a lot of things. This is not only county facilities, but it can also county municipal facilities, state facilities. If you think of a lot of land use and development as private, but a lot of things that exist are public, governmental, or semi-public. Okay, so it doesn't fall under private land use considerations because they're public facilities, public services. Those public facilities and services are delineated in Chapter 4. So we identify all the different facilities that exist within your county that may or may not be yours. They may be some other government agencies. But if you're going to sort of play ball with them and they're in your county, we have to coordinate with these other agencies, even if they're separate taxing bodies. So this begins to lay out the community facilities and infrastructure that exists within your county, okay? And you can see here, we talk about public safety, we talk about sheriff, we talk about the education, we talk about the different schools, public, private, and charter. We talk about the infrastructure that exists throughout the county. We talk about public works, water facilities, wastewater facilities. Again, the purposes of this is if we can get all this data into one report, then we can make more informed decisions as we develop the plan. But this way, you'll read this and you'll say like, oh, I understand what's going on with wastewater and what facilities we have. I understand our water distribution facility and what that services or infrastructure looks like. It's now finally all in one place. That's why we do this, all right? And then again, we go through what we consider to be some of the key findings. What's the key findings with regard to local government institutions, public safety, education, and public works, all right? Military base compatibility, this is largely being done by HB&A. They're here. They recently did a study with the military base alignment. They've got a great relationship with all the military base and facilities, so we brought them on board to handle this. If you look at that map right there on the page that's up, they're a big player in your county, obviously. They have to have access to and transportation and infrastructure to their bases. They have land uses on their bases that may impact land use within the county and the surrounding areas, and vice versa. They're a big player. They're also a huge employer. A lot of the people who work there don't live on base, so you have to have housing off base for the people who work on base. There is a very strong relationship that has to exist within the military bases throughout the entire county. This Chapter 5 begins to encapsulate that relationship. It begins to encapsulate what facilities are here, what some of those populations look like, what that employment structure looks like on the different bases, how many people are there, so that we can better plan with them in coordinated fashion going forward. So this chapter builds on work that HB&A has done in the past and puts it all into this one chapter, so you'll get a better sense of how they are a player in the county going forward.
Okay, a real quick question
Sure.
on that. Yeah. The populations that are attributed to the bases, are they population that live on base, and I suspect by the numbers that's no, population that the base supports in terms of employment, or just purely the military component? Does it include contractors, government workers? Do you know the answer to that?
Go ahead if you want to. I think they're recording.
James, can we have you step up to the mic? We're recording it.
No problem. Yes, I could add.
So that number should be all inclusive, and so that typically would include active duty contractors, but along with the active duty would be family members.
Okay, thanks.
So there's probably few counties in the country that have as big an impact as this is for you. So it deserves its own chapter, needless to say. Another one is recreation and tourism. Colorado is unique in that among all the states in the country, a lot of states have different unique requirements for municipal and county comprehensive planning. In Colorado, you have the requirement to address tourism. They don't say to what extent, but they require that county comprehensive plans address tourism in some way, shape, or form, and that's in the state enabling legislation. So this begins to talk about parks and recreation, where parks are, where the drive time and service area for those parks. We look at the El Paso County Parks Master Plan and the recreation plan for the county. We look at where all the trails are. We look at state and federal parks that exist within your county, map those out and talk about those as well. And then we begin to talk about some of the Regional Tourism Act and some of the other tourism implications that exist in the county today. So these are some of your recreational amenities and tourist destinations. We're working on refining that right now. This data set is incomplete. So here's another example of a map that's in progress that we're working on right now, which is why we don't want this to go out, because we know it's incomplete. So what's the point of putting it out? Next is community health and sustainability. This is a growing lens through which planning is done across the country, health and sustainability. For the past decade, sustainability has been one of the biggest lenses, environmental sustainability. And over the last 5 or 6 years, that lens has shifted a little bit to community health. Are we designing places that are healthier to live in going forward for us and our kids? So this begins to get at some of the community health, the resources you currently have, and some of the data with regard to life expectancy and things like that. So this gets into some of the different departments. What are some of the key components of a healthy and built environment? Water quality, water quantity, wastewater, et cetera, air quality. We just begin to articulate some of what these things are. Walking and biking, food access, healthcare access, social service access. We begin to inventory what is available to residents of El Paso County, okay? And I think a lot of people might have an anecdotal understanding of some of this. We're just trying to pull it all into one place. So yes, it's a ton of information, sort of by design. And again, air quality, water quality, we talk about some of the sustainability components. The next one is resiliency and hazard mitigation. Resiliency is sort of how quickly you recover or handle a tough situation. If you look at economic resiliency, you look at like Detroit. It's sort of a one-trick pony in terms of economy. That one-trick pony runs out of the barn and your economy goes, and it's not an economically resilient community, all right? We want to avoid, we want to be an economically resilient. Also, though, with regard to the environment or natural hazards or storm events, the mindset of, like even from FEMA, the mindset of simply helping communities recover more quickly from an event has shifted to how can we be more prepared to better handle the event as well as recover from it. So it's a little bit more proactive, not just a reactive recovery. So hazard mitigation, when you have things like what happened in New Orleans, Katrina, what you had, Hurricane Ike, Superstorm Sandy, after a couple of decades of several huge events, the whole notion of hazard mitigation has become a real proactive sort of approach in planning. So we felt as though it was important to have in the county, and the county has programs in place with regard to hazard mitigation. This becomes a sort of, again, Pikes Peak Regional Office of Emergency Management. We talk about what they're doing. Colorado Hazard and Incident Response and Recovery Plan, what that plan states for the county. So a lot of this stuff is already out there, people just are not aware of. And so we want to make sure that if we have a hazard mitigation or a resiliency component of this plan, we are dovetailing with other regional, state, and county efforts. And so this begins to articulate those other efforts. All right? And that's the last one of that. So what this is, again, is this document is an existing conditions report. Again, it is not meant to be an exhaustive inventory of everything you can possibly think of. All right? It is meant to document where we are right now. And it covers a huge area. There's no way you're going to be expected to be experts in any one of these, but through reading through this, you should get a better understanding of what's going on in the county, across the entire county. And there's a lot going on in this county. So the next thing we want to go and what we want to spend most of the time with now, again, we'll come back to revisit this in detail, is to start to establish a draft vision framework. We want to begin talking about and framing how it is we want to engage residents going forward, and in what areas we want to begin to maybe structure the vision and the goals of this document moving forward. It's a lot to get your arms around. You go from Pikes Peak and the mountains on the west to ranch land or agricultural land, some pretty barren land off to the very far, far, far east. You go to the Black Forest and some nicely wooded environment up to the very north, down to some rock and dunes to the south. You cover one of the most diverse ecological or microenvironment of any planning region you're going to come across, as well as the lifestyle of the people that want to live here. A few people on a large ranch with thousands of acres, or people living in a fairly dense mixed-use environment next to a shopping center near Colorado Springs, but in the county. So it's a wide area. So we had to begin to establish a framework with which to tackle this, because it's huge. And we have to begin to prioritize buckets of goals or areas or topics we want to address, and begin to articulate what we think is most important. And if we can begin to articulate what is most important, we can then take it out to the public and say, are these the things that we should build this plan on? We can go out to the special areas and the residents and say, given these 8 fundamental building blocks, do you agree with these, or are there other building blocks we're missing? And what should those be? But we have to be the first ones to volley something out there. So our chance now is to work with you to talk about this a little bit, so we can then work with staff from your feedback and craft some materials to begin thinking about what to take out for the next rounds of vision.
May I ask a question, please?
Shoot, yes.
And we went through the existing conditions report very quickly. I get that. Did any of your research or something that is in here that we have not been able to address yet give you objective data on what is driving the growth? I mean, I could use a lot of subjective criteria, the scenery, whatever.
Right.
But did you come up with any objective criteria to where if that changed, it would change the plan, because maybe we become a state that taxes so heavily that nobody wants to move here?
You'd be like where I'm from, Illinois.
Yeah, well, I could name some states, but I don't want to pick on anyone. But have you, what's driving all this huge growth that we're all talking about and all going to be planning for?
I would say it's a composite and a hybrid of a ton of different things, not anything one in particular. In the market research that you and Dan and Michio did, was there any 1 or 2 things that was a driving component of what is driving the growth? Or is it just a collection of a lot of things working together? You can come on up and speak to the mic. This is Sean Tapia, an associate with our firm. He worked a lot on the ECR, and with Dan Gardner, principal, and Michio Markishi, a senior in our firm, on a lot of the market and data analysis. So.
Yeah, so in general, it is a lot of key components combined. I would say, if we're trying to sum it up into a couple things, it's the growth that the state of Colorado has been capturing for the last 2 decades that's expected to continue. Again, looking back at the natural environment, the resources, the outdoor opportunities that exist here. El Paso County is situated such that John explained, where there's multiple environments that can play into what any number of people would want in a place to live. Similarly, job growth is exponential out here as well. If you go back and look through the employment piece, you'll see there are a number of key employment industries that are continuing to grow here as well as in the state of Colorado. So largely it's capturing a lot of stuff that's just naturally happening in Colorado and has been for the last 2, maybe 3 decades.
Can I have a follow-up from that while you're still there? So how much of the growth, and if you don't know the answer, that's fine, but it'd be useful for future meetings, is natural growth through birth rate in Colorado versus in-migration, and what's the balance between in-migration and out-migration from the state, or El Paso particularly?
Right. So we don't have hard numbers on that. The state demographer's office puts together some of that information at a higher level, looking, and the way the state demographer's office does it, it kind of takes it as a whole for the state and then adjusts percentages based on recent county trends. We also use data from Woods and Pool. If you're familiar, it's a national economic and demographic resource database that does a similar thing, but does it for the entire country. So whereas the state demographer's office just looks at in-migration and out-migration and birth and death rates here in the state of Colorado, Woods and Pool adjusts that across the country by county, so it's incorporating growth in Cook County, Illinois, and how that affects El Paso County, and things like that. So I don't have hard numbers on that, but we can get some at a closer rate.
Again, if it's a lot of it is people move. It's easier now to move to where you want to live. More and more people can now work remotely, no matter what industry they're in. And with people now able to move to where they want to live as opposed to where they have to work, places that are as attractive as Colorado become much, much more attractive on a national scale. Cost of living, quality of life, outdoor activation, growing employment sector, regional proximity. You guys hit the sweet spot on a lot of different marks, and collective impact is that you're growing like crazy. You look at the expected growth of over 300,000 people in the next 30 years. That's not birth. That's people in migrating from other parts of the country is a large majority of that. So what we want to go over now is draft vision framework. And again, we're going to be going through a lot of different categories. I just want you to sort of put your thinking hats on things that you think is important as we begin to develop a framework again for developing a vision, a framework for developing priorities and goals. Again, we're just starting this process. So I don't want you to be overwhelmed. I don't want you to think this is your only shot. This is the first discussion of many to go down and discuss this, but we've got to start the discussion. This is the beginning of that discussion. So you were all handed in your packets, I think, a vision statement or vision framework. It's like a page long. Did you all read it or not? If not, I'd say it would take 2 minutes and read it. It's one page, just read it real quickly. I'm not going to quiz you on it. Just take 2 minutes and read that piece of paper, all right? You won't be quizzed on it, just. All right, so what that document is a first shot at what a vision statement might look like for El Paso County, all right? So this is based off of assessing the county over the last several months and talking to, thousands of people or engaging them. And what we think is most important, a vision statement, there will be a vision statement in this document. A vision statement should capture the aspirations of a community. In this case, the community is El Paso County. It should be aspirational. It should articulate the character of what the county would like to do going forward, some of the priorities the county places on itself in terms of its values, and what it holds to be most important for the future. So this is an example of what a vision statement for the county could be like. We're not saying this is it. This is a beginning of what this could look like, to sort of get your mind thinking about what a vision would look like. Dovetailing with a vision are goals and objectives. So the vision framework that you just read, and for people in the audience to know, really sort of captures these components, all right, preliminarily. To accommodate growth while maintaining a variety of unique place types. There are a lot of places in this county that are very unique, all right, that have a charm and a uniqueness and a character that are unto themselves unlike any other place in the county. And we have to try to protect some of those, where we should protect some of those, as the county grows and changes in so many other areas. We have an influx of a lot of people this plan has to manage over the next few decades, but there's some areas of the county that may not be able to take any more people. Maybe they don't have the infrastructure to. Maybe they have a uniqueness that as development does occur, we can't lose that sense of place. So to accommodate growth while maintaining a variety of unique places across the spectrum of the county. We're not trying to treat the county the same across the entire county. To capitalize on continued economic growth, Sean talked about how the county, the state, the front range is all booming. Capitalize on continued economic growth to support existing businesses, recruit new businesses, and a very key thing is to develop the county workforce. We have to have a workforce that's going to need to meet the needs of employment going forward. To better connect all areas of the county to one another while developing a complete transportation network and drainage system. Some areas of the county you can walk, you can bike, you can drive. In other areas of the county, you couldn't walk or bike. You could only drive. Transit is sort of non-existent in most parts of the county. So going forward, as the county develops over the next 20 to 30 years, we have to look at the holistic network of what transportation needs to be. It will not be the same thing in every area of the county, and we know that. And that goes from the physical programming of roads and the design and maintenance of infrastructure to making sure that where people ought to be able to walk and bike, how that is accommodated. To continue to support and preserve the county's natural areas and to be as environmentally responsible and to provide best practices to leverage these areas for recreational and tourism amenities. 3 different reasons to sort of leverage environmental approaches, and that is to be good stewards of the natural environment and to leverage these for tourism and recreation, a big driver of economy. All right, so the natural environment is huge. All right, and then to identify potential growth areas to guide future development for the county and for resource allocation. The county cannot grow in a manner that bankrupts the county. I guess it's the only way I can put it. If development doesn't happen in a way that is managed or somewhat planned, then you're going to be in a situation where providing infrastructure becomes non-sustainable. And that's something we have to get a hold of. Again, we're trying to put a plan into place not to keep everything the way it is, because we know we are going to grow. How do we grow responsibly and protect the things we want to protect?
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Where in this framework do you look at limitations to growth? Water for sure, and then to preserve some of these areas that is the reason for why people are coming here, and you start encroaching on those areas, that's a limitation. I don't see in the framework any consideration for that unless it's kind of blended in some of the verbiage.
Yeah, so this is very, very, very high level. And then when we get into the different categories, we get into exactly what you're talking about. So the vision is very aspirational and broad spectrum. We then get into the goals, which are a bit more focused by category, but still not hyper detailed. Then underneath each goal, you'll have a series of detailed objectives. So we'll be getting to that. Let me go through the next piece. But you're exactly right. Ultimately, we need to get to that level of detail. It's not in the vision framework, it's in the things that cascade off of that.
So a framework would not have that as a consideration, the limitations to growth that may not be able to get overcome?
It can, but I think, and again, we can modify this any way you want. But I think again, just the guiding framework would be to accommodate growth while maintaining the variety of new place types. So place types could be environmentally preserved areas, naturally wooded areas, wildlife habitat. Those are unique types of places within the county, and we're saying to accommodate and manage that growth while maintaining these areas. So when we get into sort of the objectives on growth and development environment, we would see that level of detail. And we can modify this to better capture what you're talking about, but this is where I would think that would go anecdotally under this framework. But your thinking is right. That's what we have to get to, because the plan has to safeguard that stuff. If we lose that, then what's the point, right? That's the essence of it, right? Mm-hmm. If we lose what makes us attractive or desirable or unique or beautiful, then who cares if we've lost that? So you're spot on. So some of the preliminary goals that we want to do or begin to think about, and this will get at yours, and I know we're already taking notes from what you just said, are the plan will likely have goals under categories like this: land use and development, economic development, housing and communities, transportation and mobility, community facilities and infrastructure, military coordination, recreation and tourism, community health, environment and natural resources, and resiliency and hazard mitigation. So we have a lot that has to go into this plan, and a big challenge is how do we organize that volume of stuff, all right? This, we think, is one of the best ways to begin to organize and get at everything we have to get at. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of these, and I'm going to be asking, just like what you said, with regard to land use and development, what's the most important thing? And if we can begin to hear just examples of what just you said, then as we go back and work with staff to refine and craft a vision and goals, we can reflect preliminarily some of what you're telling us today. So we begin to draft those starting point materials, all right? Yeah.
The committee spent a whole lot of time going through all the small area plans.
Right. You got one more to go, right?
Did that, we do?
Yeah.
Did that feed into these goal categories?
Yes.
What came out of the plans and what we're going to keep and what we need to modify?
Yeah, and this is a good example. So the first round, these are county-wide goals. County-wide vision, county-wide objectives. We'll be getting into small area stuff. Those will be pretty specific to unique areas. These are county-wide. What's the county-wide goals? What's the county's goals for land use? So within that, we're not going to have delineated this for this small area, this for this small area. We're saying, what's our goal as a county? What's our goal?
Well, and we put that in our evaluation. This is a county-wide goal.
Correct.
And I'm just wondering if all those goals that we identified have fed into what you're showing us here.
Not until you're done with the last one, and then we have all your small area recommendations. So right now, these are county-wide, and we'll have a whole other section likely for small area, and they may have their own subset just unique to them. You know what I'm saying? So these are county-wide. We're trying to cover a pretty diverse area, over 2,100 square miles. And the first thing is, what is the county's priorities? And they may waterfall down into very specific stuff.
So just on that, to what extent has the input from the community that you had earlier on in the process fed into these goals?
That's where most of these have come from.
Okay.
So a lot of this has come from our research and our assessment. It's come from meeting with staff, meetings with you and the steering committee before this, and all the feedback we've gotten from the different people that we've engaged over the last several months. So these aren't categories we just created, but as we've gotten thousands of comments, let's say we go to a workshop, and over the course of a workshop with 100 people, we hear 500 different comments. We have to then categorize them into what sort of buckets of issues. We might hear some things on transportation, some on development, some on the natural environment. So we have to try to categorize them accordingly. All right. So again, it's taking not only our research, but feedback from thousands of people and trying to make sense of it. And that's what this breaks it down in. But we think that this basic structure would capture any category of concern in some way, shape, or form, maybe in a drop-down category under this heading. But we think that everything that we might come up with would be under one of these 8 headings. Or 10 headings.
So just another question then. Other than perhaps military coordination, are these categories pretty standard based on your experience of doing this type of plan elsewhere? The vision and goals tend to fall into these categories?
Some are. A lot of them are. Some will have like arts and culture, depending on the community. Some might have historic preservation, depending on the size town. For a county-wide, they're usually bigger buckets or categories. Sometimes you won't see things like community health. A lot of communities aren't yet doing that. Some are, so that's an anomaly. Resiliency and hazard mitigation, some plans will not have that in there because they might have a hazard mitigation master plan and they don't want to monkey with it. They say that's a separate thing, whatever. So we try to be a little bit more inclusive, to be responsive to what we've heard from people as being important, to at least make sure that it has footing in this document. So something like land use, economics, transportation, that's in every comprehensive plan. But some of the other ones are unique to El Paso County.
Madam Chair, to answer Mr. Volchev's question, staff reviewed what you're about to see, and some of the edits that we made in working with Houseo Levine were in an attempt to try to capture some of the comments we heard from you all at a much higher level than even what you've been looking at in the policies and goals from each small area plan. So to understand the structure of what you're about to see, these are even higher level than what all of you have been reviewing as part of the small area plan. So these kind of set the stage for how we draft some of those policies and goals under each of these categories. But staff's input and ultimately what you're going to see came from our interaction with you on each of those small area plans.
And again, if you think hierarchy, you have to sort of start big and work down to the detail. So the vision is the big, the goals is the next level, then the objectives is below that, then you get into real plan detailed recommendations, and that's the level below that. So we're just beginning to frame out what this thing's going to look like. So these are the organizational categories, if you will.
And when you mentioned a vision statement from the discussion just a little bit ago, is that something that you're going to write and propose to the committee for us to review and tinker with?
Yes, absolutely. And design by committee is difficult. Authorship by committee is even worse. It's a real challenging thing. So the format out of necessity kind of has to go like this. We talk to thousands of people. We talk with staff a lot, back and forth, back and forth. They talk with you. We talk with you. And at some point, you got to sort of sit back in a room, close the door with certain people and say, let's take a shot at putting pen to paper. We've talked a lot about this. We think we have a real good sense of what this ought to be to start with. Let's take a shot at it. Then once you take a shot at it and put it out there, then that's a starting point by which everything can change. And so we've done that with the internal level with us and staff to tweak and revise. We're going to have a discussion this evening or today to get a little bit more information. We'll refine it even more. Then we'll go through the process of putting pen to paper to give to you to start that process of a more formal, like joint authorship, if you will. But again, we're still in just the formulation stages, all right? I know it's a lot, but I don't want you to be overwhelmed like, this is too much for us to respond to. We're doing this to get some feedback so we can begin to craft what you will be responding to, is the best way to put it. This is part of that process. So land use and development, these are what we think are some of the 4 key things for land use and development that could very well be goals of the comprehensive plan, all right? So as I go through, I'm going to read off these 4 key things or these 4 goals under land use and development. And what I would ask is that as we go through this, anything that you think is especially important or ought to be a goal or objective for land use and development, jot it down you should have a piece of paper that has all these categories on it, correct? Right? Okay. So as I go through land use and development, I would like you to jot down on there any just thing that you think is most important to you as we begin to craft these materials, all right? Because we've worked with staff to develop these, but we want your input to add to these or to refine them. So this is land use and development by category. These are preliminary goals for discussion purposes that we and staff have put together, county staff and consultant team have put together to start the process of discussing land use and development goals. So the 4 are to direct new, and again, goals are things to which you achieve, all right? My goal might be to be 180 pounds and look like Adonis. And then I can say, that's my goal, and here's 12 objectives I have to meet to get there, all right? This is the goal. These are goals. These aren't recommendations. These aren't objectives. These are the big picture goals, okay? So for land use and development, so I'll read these off, but I want you to do is if there's something that jumps like to what Mark said was like, you know, sort of the protecting those unique environmental areas or resources that makes us desirable to begin with. If we lose those, what's the point? So under land use and development, that may be one of your goals to make sure we protect those areas. So we need to know that. So if there's something that you think is a priority or should be a goal, jot it down on your paper under the category, but I'll read off sort of what staff and we were thinking, all right? So to direct new development in a manner that ensures compatibility with existing neighborhoods, commercial districts, and employment centers, and alignment with infrastructure capacity. So it's, again, to direct new development in a way that's compatible and reflects what we have. Coordinate with municipalities to develop annexation and growth strategies, to limit leapfrog development, responsible plan for extension of infrastructure, and to promote context-sensitive design. To encourage a range of development types to support a variety of residential, commercial, recreational, and employment land uses throughout the county. And continue to encourage policies that ensure development pays for itself, that it minimizes cost burdens placed on the county to accommodate new development. So we saw these as being the 4 most important goals as we begin to structure our approach to land use and development. So I guess I would go back to what Mark said. I kind of know one of the key things that he thinks is a priority for land use and development, to protect those areas that make El Paso County unique, desirable, those beautiful natural areas. That should be a goal or a priority, right? So I get...
So there's
Yeah.
a word here that causes us, I think on both sides of the fence, a lot of debate is the word compatibility.
Right.
And I think there needs to be some exploration in the plan as to exactly what that means.
Okay.
And in what context. So I know you said you looked at Plan COS.
Mm-hmm.
In that plan, they did what I thought was quite a useful exercise is in identifying areas of change. So areas where there was likely to be quite a significant amount of change because of the changing characteristics of the area, places which were kind of fairly established areas which we're unlikely to see any change at all, and then kind of a range in between.
Right.
Is that the kind of exercise you would see doing here?
Absolutely. Yeah, we'll be establishing what we call place types is one thing that we're going to be doing. We did that in Aurora. We've done it in a few big cities and counties for a while now. And we will be establishing those areas that are stable and shouldn't change. And the goal in those areas will be to preserve and protect the character of what we have. And I think that's important for certain areas. Other areas are going to see maybe a little bit of change, infill development, a little bit of accommodation over time. And other areas are likely going to see huge change. And part of the job at the beginning when we start developing the plan, we'll first say, like, let's step back and assess what should stay the same, what'll change a little, what'll change a lot. So yes, they're very similar, yes. Yeah. So I think your thing about compatibility and defining what isn't likely to change is very important. But we will be doing that, yeah.
And then I suppose my other question is going forward a little bit to the house. I can talk about it when we get to housing. I'll talk about it now. Is you identify a need in the housing and communities, or potential need for providing areas of higher density development, promoting mixed use of housing, attainable housing. Are you going to be identifying the areas in the county, given that the majority of the county is rural, and there are only really certain areas that are close to urban areas that would reasonably accommodate that type of development? Are you going to actually identify areas that could accommodate that level of development?
Yes. And so I just put up here the housing communities bullet points. Just you have them just so the people in the audience can see. So this is another category that we think we need to have goals and objectives for. It'll be a section of the plan, housing and communities. And to get to your point, the county is so diverse in terms of existing land use, natural resources, topography, everything, that we just make a blanket statement and say, accommodate a range of residential development types. That's so homogeneous it means nothing in an area as diverse as this county is. So we have to identify those areas where we think different types of housing are most appropriate, and those areas where we do not think that it is at all. That's got to be part of the plan. The plan actually has to allow you to make informed decisions going forward. So it's got to provide that level of guidance. So when we talk about promote a mix of housing type, maybe higher density in certain areas, we will say where that ought to go. When we talk about areas that should be more conservation design techniques with environmental areas or low density, we'll identify the areas where that should be employed. But we'll try to make it as guiding and as helpful as possible. It won't be generic recommendations, yeah.
Madam Chair. So is it appropriate at this level of plan, as part of the goals, to specify values in terms of percentages or ranges? For example, if we want to address attainable housing, could we put in a goal of some percentage of future developments should include future development should include some percentage of attainable housing, assuming that the other infrastructure needs are there. Something like that. Is that appropriate for this plan?
At a goal level, I would not for a county of this size, and the reason being is this. Usually I don't want the percentages to be arbitrary, and this is going to come back to bite you if it's not based off of something. Usually when a community puts in place a housing plan, a detailed housing plan with prescriptive numbers and guidance on percentage, and first define attainable, define the percentage. Why did you back into that percentage number? Is it different in different locations? That's usually sort of like an access to attainable housing study that is done to develop a very detailed plan. But when you get into numbers or percentages, that's coming close to regulatory, and in a county-wide 20-year plan, I wouldn't recommend it here. It could very well be something that gets developed later, to say, boy, if we really want to get serious about developing a plan that identifies the areas for attainable housing, then we need to do another study to figure out exactly how many units, what type, where it should go, what are the barriers to attainable housing right now that exist. There are firms out there that do nothing but those studies. It's pretty involved. So at this level, we need to articulate the goals for the county with regard to providing it, and maybe the plan can identify the areas where it might be best to go. But I'd be hesitant to put percent numbers in at least at this level. Yeah, I think it might be premature.
That's fine. What about parks and recreational facilities?
Yeah, and again, I wouldn't put in a percent number. Again, it would be based off of what? I suppose you could go to the national park standard of so many acres per 1,000 people and say, work toward providing over time parks that are in proportion to the national park standards. But at a goal level, you seldom see percent standards or numeric standards in goal statements. You could, but if we were going to do that, I would do that further down in the document where we can get into the recommendations and study to drive those numbers. So.
But there is also an extent to which you're overlapping with the Parks Department's
Right.
Parks Master Plan, and so
Right.
that's the arena really for defining those percentages. And
So, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I think you mentioned the key, I think, here is defining what attainable housing options are
Right.
in the first place, having some, common understanding of what that is. And likewise, I would say parks and recreation, what are the, what's the universe of things that we consider to be important that people have access to? And if we define those at the higher levels, then it's a lot easier to bring in specific sub-goals and priorities later on.
And part of the challenge is, and I guess I keep going back to this, not to dilute the importance of this document, because it's hugely important and so necessary at this time in the county's trajectory. But this comprehensive plan, no matter how detailed, will never supplant the need for a detailed transportation and thoroughfares plan. This comprehensive plan, no matter how detailed or robust, will supplant the need for a Parks and Recreation master plan. This plan will never supplant the need for probably more detailed housing studies that the county needs to undertake with, maybe in conjunction with all the municipalities in the county to figure out how collectively they can service the housing needs of future residents based on attainment assessment levels or whatever. This needs to be the plan that provides a foundation for that coordination and decision-making, but on a lot of things, it's not going to get to the level of detail ultimately you may need to get at over time. And that's what we have to need to be careful of. So, unlike other plans, a housing plan just covers housing. A Parks and Recreation plan just covers in parks and recs. A comprehensive plan, by its very nature, covers everything. And in doing so, it lays guidance for those things, but it isn't meant to get into the nuance that each one of those will get into of them by themselves. And that's some of the balance we have to find. So we'll do this one since it's on the screen, then I'll go back. Housing is a big deal, so are the communities where this housing exists. We're not planning in a vacuum. There are communities that are very clearly defined, that clearly have their own character, and that exist now, and they provide housing. Other areas, new housing is going to go. So promote the development of a mix of housing types to accommodate growth in areas that have been appropriately identified for higher density. Utilize lower density housing types and land conservation techniques to help preserve the character of rural and environmentally sensitive areas where more intense development is not compatible, where we don't want it. Locate attainable housing options that have convenient access to necessary goods, service, and employment opportunities, and to support aging in place approach to providing housing options. And that is that people who are born and raised here ought to be able to stay in El Paso County as long as they want. And they shouldn't get to the point where there isn't a housing product for them to move into. So that's the idea of aging in place. That at some point in your life, you get to an age where you have to move. You ought to be able to age in the community you want to age in. So if you look at aging in place as a spectrum of housing type, are we providing a range of housing type to meet the needs of everybody at every age? So these are sort of the four fundamental pieces. So put new housing, the right variety and right mix where it ought to go for higher densities and new development. Protect the areas where higher density should not go to protect the environmental or low density development and character of those areas. To provide attainable housing where it's close to goods and services, where people don't have to drive long distances, and make sure the county is a place where people can grow old and age. And those are, we think, are four of the most fundamental goals this plan has to build on when we look at housing for the county. So I don't know if anybody else has any other questions or ideas about housing as a category that has come up. But this gets at most of what we heard from the people that we spoke with over the last several months. All right. The one that we jumped at after land use and development was economic development. Economics is a big deal. And again, there's a lot of detailed nuance that goes into this, and it covers over so many different things. You want to be an attractive place for people to move to or businesses to locate at? What are your schools like? You want to be a place where someone wants to move, open up a company, and hire 200 people? Is it a place employees would want to live or work? Does it have bike trails? Does it have beautiful neighborhoods? Does it have environmental areas? Does it have good schools, access to health care? I mean, there are so many things that go into economic development that are sort of not always quantifiable. But these are what we think are the five most important building blocks for economic development for the county going forward.
Before you go into those,
Yes.
can I ask a question about, given how important this is there a prioritization of these different categories that you list here? Because I would put this one first.
Right.
And then everything else flows from that.
Right. What we typically, not always, we have on occasion, we typically don't number goals because it indicates a prioritization. We can rearrange the order in which they appear in the document, that's fine. We will often number the objectives underneath the goal so people can say, goal A, objective 5. But we often put in, whenever we have to number stuff, we will often put at the beginning, numbering these does not indicate prioritization. Unless people put them in an order where they want us to do that. We have on occasion, but typically they're like, maybe land becomes available that isn't now, and maybe in 5 years it does, so it moves up on the list because we can do it. And maybe this is a top priority, but after 5 years we just don't get any traction, that's going to drop down. So we don't want to say it's still the number one priority. So we rearrange the order they can appear in a document, but we often don't number them for that reason. So we can, there's no right or wrong. We can, but. So continue to leverage the county's diverse employment base and desirable location to recruit new businesses and spur development in growing sectors. Support efforts to recruit, train, and retain a skilled workforce. That workforce piece is essential because the other sectors won't grow if you don't have the workforce here to provide the labor and or employment. Encourage the development of commercial districts in underserved areas of the county to better meet the needs of residents and businesses. There are some areas where people just don't have close proximity to goods and services, and over time, we have to see if we can't fix that. Utilize economic opportunity zones to support new business development, like the airport zone and a couple of the other ones. And work with the military installations to support their efforts to foster new development and create new jobs. As they employ people that aren't just in the military but live off campus and work at these bases, that's a huge economic boon to the county to have all these military base employees living in the county. So a coordination with those military bases is a big deal. So we think these are 5 of the biggest goals that should serve to drive our approach to economic development in the county.
Question.
Shoot.
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, and I may need to be educated on economic development, but if we already know that the county is going to grow by 250,000 people over decades, all this, in my mind, is to attract people here, these bullets. If we already know they're coming, then you really don't have to do any of those things because the downside is then they don't come. So it's kind of like, are we trying to attract more here? Or are we trying to sustain what we already have, or
Well, the answer is
once they get here, or what?
the answer is yes, and it's if you talk from an economic development perspective, what are the types of businesses you would like to attract here? What does their employment structure or employee structure look like? Different businesses models have different things they look for. It's one of the things like Bentonville, Arkansas has really begun to focus, or about 10 years ago, focus on quality of life. As the Walmart world headquarters, they were having a lot of people come there, they would get a job, they'd live for a few years and they'd leave because the community wasn't what they wanted it to be. They didn't see themselves living there long term. So they started focusing on restaurants in the downtown and bike trails and mountain biking and kayaking, and they made it a great place to live. And now people are moving there that have nothing to do with Walmart because they move there because it's a great place to live. So you're in the projected trajectory of Colorado's growth. So you're projected to get all this. But if you don't provide some of the amenities that new corporations or businesses or industries are looking for, they might go to another county in Colorado. You might get some, you'd get some for sure, but wouldn't you like to be in the driver's seat of getting the best, of getting what you want, of being able to be on that A select preferred list of people looking to locate a new business or a new company or economic development or restaurants opening here. So you're going to get population growth, there's no question. The question is, though, how do you position yourself to attract the best that the world has to offer in terms of economic prosperity? So you have to be looking at these amenities and different ways to, I think, gone are the days of taking what you get. And you now have to fight for what you want. And economic development may be the front lines of that.
So are we looking to attract employees who fit the skills of the workforce or adapt the skills of the workforce to potential new employees?
I think you're likely going to get both. I think to be competitive over time, you want to begin to make sure that you have a trained and available workforce. So that means, again, big picture, Do they have a way of getting to work if they don't own their own car? Is transit available? Is it not available? Is there housing that they can afford that's in close proximity to where they may be working? Are there goods and services close to where they're living because they have to live there to be close to where they're working? Do they have the educational level within a coordinated effort with your local education institutions to provide the skills they need to be a viable workforce member in a burgeoning industry? So there's a lot. There's a workforce that is here that will continue to grow, that people may locate here because the workforce is here. But as the industry comes here and begins to grow, you're going to want to train that workforce to be more adaptive and applicable to a growing industry. So it's going to be both. But what's caught communities in the past in trouble is they've lost focus on workforce. We're doing work in another state, big plan, big area, and I talked to some of the big industrialists in the region, and they said 12, 13 years ago, they would get like an 8-9% employee turnover from year to year, all right? Now they're looking at like 38% turnover year to year. The recruitment, the interviewing, the training, it's killing them. It's killing them because the region is not able to retain the workforce needed for not only to attract new industry, but to keep the industry that's there and keep them from moving someplace else. So you got to do both. You got to attract them and keep the industry you have from departing. So it's a huge issue. So I think workforce is a very, very big one. Any other issues? But we think economic development is a huge a platform for where some of these recommendations have to go. Housing communities, we did. Transportation and mobility, again, you've got two key transportation plans that were adopted, one in 2016, one in 2018. We're not reinventing this. These are things that dovetail with your existing transportation plan goals and objectives, as well as us sitting down with the transportation folks from the county and asking them what is most important for us to address moving forward. So this is really reflective of that. So establishing a complete transportation network that connects all areas to one another, emphasizing east-west routes, reducing congestion, and promoting safe and efficient travel. Pretty straightforward. You've got some areas of the
Question on that one.
Shoot.
And I'm sorry to get down in the
it's
specific
fine.
detail.
That's why we're here.
What brought up the thought about emphasizing east-west routes? Because put any one of us on I-25 or Powers at 7:30 or 5 p.m., and that is not going
It's
to be crossing your
brutal.
mind.
Yeah, it's brutal.
It's brutal.
Right.
And until you get that 8-lane north-south bypass to the east, just not going to get.
It's rough.
So why the east-west focus?
Go ahead, Craig.
So one of the big burdens of this region, both city and county, has been east-west connectors.
To what on the east side?
To the future growth. I mean, that's where most of the growth in the city and the county will be
the east, yeah.
located. And right now, your main east-west connector is Woodman. That's more or less it. As opposed to Powers, Austin Bluffs, Academy, and I-25. You don't have major east-west connectors that span the region, generally speaking. There's development of a few more, particularly in the northern end of the county. But that has been a major burden. And what that ends up doing is putting most of the traffic on north-south arterials in order to get to another east-west alignment. So I'm glad you brought up the north-south traffic congestion, because it's a product of a lack of east-west connectors.
Okay, thanks.
And Craig hit it on the head. We're supposed to get a few 100,000 more people. That growth is east. And right now there's no, imagine that coming online without the roads infrastructure being built to accommodate that. It'd just be a disaster. So ideally, in principle, we're talking about a grid. You want a grid of major arterials, a grid of collectors, and then in between that, a grid of local streets. And we don't have that grid, and where you don't have a grid, things don't trickle out over the course of a grid. They're funneled from all over to one thing and then out that one, and that's a disaster. So I think 25 is indicative of that going north right now. We don't even have a bad 25 running east-west. So.
Can I make a comment about
Yes.
the multimodal transportation, transit? Admirable goals, very supportive of it in principle. We have a terrible transit system in the city, let alone the county. So my question is, how are you going to frame that in terms of the reality of actually getting transit, effective transit in the county? And is there going to be any discussion of funding of those sort of transit options?
Yeah, again, that's a challenge everywhere, even where you have the densities and the population to do it. Transit is a tough lift. The challenge is, though, if this is going to be a 20-year plan and we're projected to grow by a couple 100,000 over the next 20, 30 years, in certain areas you're going to have the density and the population and the employment to warrant a more robust transit system via bus. So it may very well be that it's going to start from and radiate out from Colorado Springs and other municipalities, picking up some of the fringe county areas that are developed. So it's not going to be county-wide, but we have to pick it up where we can, building off of a system that is in place now, probably a system that doesn't adequately do what it should now, let alone if we have another 200,000 people in the area. So this is something we have to work on over time. Some things in a plan like this, you have to get out in front of to see if you can continue to try to move that needle. Not an easy lift, not a quick hit, but we're talking a 20-year horizon. And if you picture us, close your eyes and picture El Paso County 20 years from now with another 240,000 people, I'm hoping we have a better transit system in place, or it's going to be really rough. So,
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
in considering these two goals, multimodal transportation has a lot of different meanings, and really we talked about this morning. It's sort of getting from point A to point B. That could be a walkable scenario. It could be bikeability. It could be transit. It could be individual automobile traffic. But when you get into transit, most people think of light rail, subways, and that can be, but it's also bus stops, it's park and rides, which the county does participate in currently. And as we continue to grow, as Mr. Halsey pointed out, not all of the development around those transit locations and those park and ride facilities is necessarily going to be in the city or a city. So when we look at supportive development, if you read that goal in its entirety, we're looking at, well, maybe that's a good location for higher density residential development or commercial services to be provided. So we want to have enough specificity so that if we're part of that decision making, then we can respond to it appropriately. But there's no guarantees that we'll even be involved. But I think at this point, certainly we are already.
Okay.
So again, promote walkability and bikeability and multimodal where we can. Foster transit-supported development. This is what Craig had just talked about. And then continue to encourage long-range transportation planning efforts to develop a sustainable funding mechanism, to what you just talked about, for infrastructure and maintenance. It's one of the biggest issues the county is facing right now, is even maintaining the road system that it has. The funding system for that is broken in terms of the way things are set up. So a big part of planning for that is planning for an effective funding mechanism going forward. So it's one of the biggest line item deficiencies in municipal codes and county codes across the country, often at a scale of 1/10 of what it should be as a line item. So. Community facilities and infrastructure. This is, again, community facilities and infrastructure. Infrastructure is water, wastewater, sewer, utilities. Community facilities are those things that are not private, but public facilities. So continue to improve coordination with local and regional organizations to provide high-quality community facilities. Manage growth and development in appropriate areas to ensure adequate provision of utilities. So we're not permitting or allowing development to happen in an area that can't be adequately served. Those are big problems. Expand the best management practices to protect water quality, conserve water, minimizing impacts of flooding, and beautify the El Paso county community, and continue to support and improve the effectiveness of public safety services throughout coordination, funding, and planning. You look at just the fire districts alone that service this county, the sheriff, the different municipal police departments that all coordinate. That public safety aspect, that emergency response access is huge. We need to sort of take a look at it from an organizational coordination and a funding component. And this also begins to get at sort of those best management practices to protect water quality and water quantity throughout the county as a driving force. So, but community facilities and infrastructure, often the things people don't see, they just know if they need it and it's not there, it's broken. And that's when they raise the issue. Military base coordination, pretty straightforward. Maintain good working relationships with the military installations and help support planning efforts and the mutual success of the county and the military bases. Support compatible land uses within and close proximity to the bases. That's always an issue, or can be an issue. And then another one that was raised and articulated by staff was to ensure this coordinated planning efforts for transportation impacts and access. So if you look at these as institutional uses, they're massive. And they often have industrial uses, commercial uses, residential uses, public uses, logistic and transit use, and there's a lot going on some of these. And the impact in terms of land use is palpable, and the needs on both sides in terms of access and transportation is palpable. And the best thing we can do is continue to coordinate those planning efforts. Recreation and tourism. So a few different ones. Again, some of these are going to have 4 or 5 goals. Some might just have 1 or 2, and that's okay. Continue to provide high quality, sustainable outdoor recreation as key amenities for residents and visitors. So high outdoor recreation. Explore projects, programs, and initiatives to enhance tourism in unincorporated areas to increase tourism and create employment opportunities. And continue to support efforts to plan for and provide parks, trails, and open space throughout the region. A big part of that is coordinating with the Parks and Trails Master Plan and the Parks and Trails Master Plan of the surrounding region and local municipalities. So it's really outdoor recreation, providing these amenities, coordinating and exploring initiatives to enhance tourism for employment and tourism dollars, and to continue to support tourism, recreation, parks, and open space. So really 3 components. Anything else there that you can think of in terms of tourism or recreation that's not one of these 3 things? And again, a big part of this is coordinating with the parks and recreation plan that already exists. Next is community health. This is a bit more, nebulous in terms of how it gets traction in a plan, but increasing importance to people who live in a community, I guess is the best way to put it. So continue to support community environmental health initiatives through coordinated and collaborative efforts with the county and other local organizations. Health can be childhood obesity, access to health, mental health. It can be as a community walkable. There are so many, access to healthy foods. There are so many things that get at public health that it can sometimes be overwhelming and a bit nebulous in terms of all the different variables. So the challenging thing in a comprehensive plan is to find how to begin to give it real estate within the document in a way that can actually inform decision-making going forward. So we've broken it down into these community health components. Community health components are often more, again, the things that we can leave active, healthy lifestyles with access to health and access and mobility. The other one is ensure that all residents, regardless of income and geographic location, have access and safe affordability to nutritious food. So we've broken it down into sort of the physical components of community health and access to health, and another one about nutrition and food, and how the county can begin to address those 2 aspects.
And do you have any experience of elsewhere where you've tried to address these types of issues? Because I'm having difficulty understanding how we can address these. When you say regardless of geographic location, bearing in mind this is a largely rural county, and people choose to live in rural areas because they want to be away from everything else.
Right.
And yet now the county's almost being obliged to, through this, provide additional service to those residents who make that choice based on these aspects of food and service and other aspects.
Right, that's a very good point. And we probably should go back and reword this. And I don't want to say, I guess I would say, to the extent we are able to, or the extent to that it's appropriate. If someone chooses to live 40 miles away from everything on a ranch in the eastern part of the county, God bless them, that's great. I have relatives that would love to do that. But that doesn't mean the county is under an obligation to make sure that they are close to something when they've chosen to not be close to things. Mm-hmm. So that's a very good point. And I think that needs to be reworded. I think we want to make sure that every place in the county is as healthy as it can be, but it's still going to be what it's going to be. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. So I think your point is very well taken.
Madam Chair, sometimes one of the things we have to consider is also the zoning entity for the county is at times our regulations get in the way of something just like this, where we're not allowing agricultural stands or farmers markets to occur in some of those more rural areas simply because the zoning doesn't allow for it. Well, maybe that's not actually the best thing for the community. Maybe we need to figure out better ways to allow for it and ensure that any impacts can be mitigated through the siting of the facility in the given area. And those types of services, agricultural stands and farmers markets, those are not unique to the city of Colorado Springs. They're happening all throughout our region. And I can tell you from experience that sometimes our zoning regulations do get in the way of something like that occurring in certain areas.
But it's a good point. We don't want to give anybody the false impression the county is obligated to provide things in every area of the county. Yeah, so I think it's well taken. The next one is the environment and natural resources. And this can be covered on a lot of different fronts. And I think it goes back to some of the initial comments that were made about, these are some of the greatest things about El Paso County, the diversity of the different ecosystems and environments that exist, and the need to protect these as we accommodate appropriate growth in other areas and not in these areas. So the first goal, and again, these are the goals under which there might be several detailed objectives, but the first goal would be to consider the environmental impact related to natural resource conservation, air quality, water quality, wildlife habitat protection, and waste management during the planning process, during any planning process. So as planning and development occurs, whether it's private sector, public sector, infrastructure, that this be front and foremost in terms of what we consider. And then to promote sustainable best practices with regard to development and infrastructure. And when you're looking at development, regardless of development type, there are sustainable best practices that should be employed as new development takes place. And we can delineate all these underneath there, but really is to consider the impacts of everything on these environmentally cherished areas. And the other one is to promote best practices with regard to all development. So these two are the things that we think are the ones that drive everything with regard to the natural environment should come from these two.
Just on that, just from a practitioner's point of view, the one that's really difficult to quantify, I think, is air quality.
It is.
And the impact on air quality of any new development, you're saying during any planning process. So if you're proposing a residential development, how do you find the impact on air quality other than by perhaps reference to traffic increase? But is that just moving it from one place to another? So it's just a word of caution on that particular criteria or requirements. Obviously, when we get down into developing those a little bit more, I think we should be looking at giving some firmer guidance as to how that's analyzed.
Yeah, that's a good point. Usually you only see in any municipal or county regs air quality as a performance standard for industrial uses.
Exactly.
You know, water quality, air pollution, noise, vibration, light, glare, odor, things like that. You usually only see them as industrial performance standards. But as a benchmark to guide development best practices, is a lot more nuanced. It's a lot more difficult. Yeah. I would agree. The next one is resiliency and hazard mitigation. These are, again, there is the Office of Emergency Management that has protocols and a plan in place for natural hazards and emergencies. And we want to make sure that this plan dovetails with those efforts and adopted policies right now. And there's a couple of different things. There's natural hazards, there's emergencies, there's man-made hazards, there's, you know, a wildfire, which the county is unfortunately too well aware of. There's what happens if a truck overturns on 25 blocks, everything is carrying a bunch of hazardous chemicals. So there's a wide variety of different natural and man-made hazards and or emergencies that could take place. So prioritize hazard mitigation as growth and development occurs. A lot of this is development happening in an area where it shouldn't, or in a matter that might be prone to creating a natural hazard or other hazards because of poor design. Continue to support planning efforts and best practices to ensure community resiliency. Resiliency can be environmental, it can be economic, it can be how quickly do you recover from something, and how robust you are in sort of weathering the storm, if you will, when something does happen. And continue to coordinate communication and activity among Office of Emergency Management, the OEM, emergency service providers, and military installations to improve responses and recovery to natural hazards and emergencies. And that wording of recovery, response and recovery to natural hazards and emergencies is directly from the OEM policy.
Just
Yes.
wordsmithing a little bit. When you say prioritize hazard mitigation as growth and development occurs, okay, let's say growth and development doesn't occur. I mean, it just seems to be disconnected. You're going to prioritize only if
I
growth
gotcha,
and
yeah, right.
so that.
Right.
And then I just have a general concern when anytime we use the word continue.
Okay,
So continue is status quo. If you're planning for growth and development, et cetera, you're not just continuing.
Right.
You really have a higher objective than to just continue because maybe what you're continuing isn't meeting the
Okay.
need. So anywhere where you see the word continue, you could almost lop that off
You could.
and go to the next word
you could.
beyond it.
And I think the reason, and you're exactly right, and I've seen it done a couple of ways, we can easily do that. I think the reason we do that is we'll have in there support planning efforts, and then we'll hear like, well, we do that now. So what you're saying is we should continue to do it. You're right. You're right.
Well, you
So
take
that's-
it, you elevate both those words
Correct,
to
right.
whatever the next
Right,
level is.
right. So that's a good point. It makes it a little bit
better.
more proactive as opposed to just doing what we're doing.
Right.
I totally hear you, yep.
How
But we
about
can do that.
How about improve?
Improve, yeah.
Yeah.
Those are all good words. Yeah.
Improve planning efforts and best practices to whatever, or improve coordination with, not continue to coordinate. That's good, yeah. I can see where those came up, but I like your point better. So again, I know you've had a lot thrown at you today. I understand that. Let me again sort of frame the purpose of this meeting. One is to show you what we've been working on. That's the ECR. And now you've had a walkthrough of that. And over the next month or two, we'll be digesting that with you and discovering what's in it and discussing it. And we wanted to get it out into the ether. All right, so now it's on your radar. So we're wrapping up that step 4. We are also very, very, very beginning stages of step 5, where we are going to be responsible for crafting a vision, some goals, and some objectives. So we wanted to begin to pepper you with what that might begin to look like so that when you see it, you have a familiarity with what it is you're getting, all right? So this is a very important, again, it's a lot, but it's a crucial nexus for us in the planning process. It's the closing of one phase and the opening up of the next phase. And right now they're sort of crossing over a little bit. And so it's a little bit messy. That's unavoidable. But we wanted to provide today an orientation to both what's wrapping up one and starting of a new. So when we have those discussions, you sort of know where we're coming from.
And maybe this doesn't belong in this type of a plan, but I don't know how we can talk about any of these goals or vision without discussing funding and how funding interacts with all that. Am I way off, or is that not belong in a comprehensive plan? Because you can't accomplish so many of these things as a goal without funding, and we have huge funding issues
Right.
in our state, our county, particularly in relates to transportation, transit, all of those things. We have a lot of stovepipes. We fund in different ways through metropolitan districts, through
Right.
the Pikes Peak Rural Transportation Authority. And that at least gives us some relief, but we have serious issues, public
Right.
safety.
Right, so here's your answer. The answer is yes and no. You're not wrong in saying funding is a crucial issue. Sequentially, we're not there yet. And so we're going to get there, but here's why. You can get paralyzed in the funding discussion. I mean, that can be, oh my God, it's always the hardest discussions for any organization, whether it's a married couple or a county board. Funding is tough, all right? So the first thing we have to begin to articulate is what's important to us, what we want to accomplish, and why. And then we start developing the plan. It's, okay, what do we have to do to get there, all right? Well, the last part of what we have to do to get there is say, okay, we have to do this, 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 and this. Do we all agree these are the necessary steps? Yes. Okay, then reality-wise, here's what we have to do financially to pull this off. So it is typically the last thing developed, all right? Because something might be really, really tough to fund. Damn near impossible, if not impossible. But if it's truly the most important thing to do, I don't want to not get to it because it might be difficult to fund. I want to have that honest discussion. The example I have, and the way I sort of learned this lesson early on is we were working in a community where I sort of asked people what the most important thing was the city should be doing, and I heard all these answers, and I said, well, I'm kind of surprised that out of the 80 people in the room, nobody said that we should have a second bridge over the river. We only have one, and it's brutal. The congestion, the traffic, the emergency response, whatever else. And everybody started laughing. I go, well, you know, I'm missing the joke. What's so funny? And they said, well, that would be everybody's number one issue. And they all agreed, but they said, we've been chasing after that for 30 years, and we just keep getting pushback from the state and the Army Corps of Engineers, so we just gave up. And so my answer was, is it still the most important thing? And they're like, yeah. And I go, then that's our number one thing. Just because it might be difficult to fund or to do, I don't want to not discuss it if it's the top issue. So we get to funding, and we try to identify later the best sources of funding that can be pursued without a guarantee of getting there. But we say this is what has to be done in order to begin to fund this initiative. But first, we want to identify those initiatives. If we start talking about funding now, we'll never get there. So you're exactly right. One thing, we have to talk about it, but two, not yet. That's the best way I can describe it.
And I would say on that, those of you that have gone through those small area plans, you know, some of them have action items. What you're talking about is an action item. It's something moving forward that the county needs to pursue because it's that important. So it's through this process that we kind of sift through all of this stuff that we know to find out, well, where do we need to improve? Okay, so we find that out first. Where do we need to go? And then the action items are, how do we get there? And those are the discussions that they're hard. It's hard to have a discussion about the funding because there's competing interests for every single dollar. If you want to see what I'm talking about, go to the Board of County Commissioners budget hearings that are coming up in October. You'll see that even at the county level, and we're not even talking about state and federal level. But we have to have these discussions in order to pull out those things that are important that we know we need to address. Then we get into the action items towards the tail end. Those provide guidance for the county moving forward.
So again, sort of where we are is the vision is that aspirational statement and narrative. The next thing are the goals. And so I'm just going to go back to what I've got on the screen is land use and development. In working with staff, we think this is our initial shot at what the 4 goals could be under this category. Now, each one of these goals may have 3 to 8 objectives on how we can begin to get that goal accomplished. But the first thing is to say, okay, what are we trying to achieve here? You know, as a household, you might say, listen, balance a budget, provide a roof over my head, get my kids through college, and have retirement. There's my 4 goals. Now, each one of those will have a whole bunch of action items and a whole bunch of objectives to meet that goal. But under each one of these categories, I want you to begin thinking, okay, what are the 3 or 4 top goals? What are we trying to achieve with regard to land use? We know we're going to grow by a ton of people. What are our guiding goals? What are the goals under which everything will flow? That's what this is. All right, these are the goals, and it's not all the drill down, but these are the things that will drive the development of the drill down. So that's how I want you to begin to think about this after this meeting and after this when you meet with staff to talk about it. This is the stage we're at yet. We can't get to the objectives. We can't get to the action items till we first make sure this is right or close to right for now. So.
I have a question on the economic development goals. The first one, continue to leverage the county's diverse employment base. I'm looking at the page from the existing conditions on employment. And my question is, to what extent really is it diverse? And is it diverse enough? I mean, I think there's always a perception, and the figures tend to bear it out, that there's a lot of influence of military bases here. But looking at the growth, the changes, actually, in the past 10 years, the military has reduced, and it's not showing that it's going to grow by very much. But how vulnerable are we to changes in military installations? And there are other industries which are quite high, such as healthcare, which is projected to grow considerably. Right. And what type of jobs are those? Are they high-paying jobs, low-paying jobs? And then how does that spin off into what type of housing is needed? So I'm assuming that's all going to come out in the wash when we get into the details. Yeah,
right. And so that's why we do some of that initial baseline market and economic, is to make sure we understand that. There is no 100% recession-proof industry. Government's about as close as you're going to get, and we all know that that's not either, but military bases are more recession-proof than a lot of other industry, clearly. So it is a very stabilizing influence, even if it goes down a little bit over time or is projected to. Other industries, logistics, health, like you indicated, are projected to go way up, and other ones will emerge that we don't know. The thing that you have right now is you have a lot of military, but you also have a lot of other things. No one dominates the landscape. Like other regions, there are definitely industries that dominate everything, and that's bad. So right now, compared to a lot of regions, you have a fairly diverse employment and economic base, and you need to leverage that to make it more diverse and robust going forward, but you're not starting with a homogeneous one. So it could be better. You've got some that are fairly resilient and economy are bulletproof to ebbs and flows, but you've got to build on the diversity you have. You've got some healthcare now, it's projected to get even more so. So you have to build off the existing diverse one, make it stronger going forward. So it can be better, but it's pretty good compared to a lot of parts of the country.
And is there some sort of index that we can actually look at to compare ourselves with other parts of the country in terms of diversity?
Yeah, so Sean, if you want to speak to that. So the answer is yeah, you can look at it by other counties in the state versus other states, and the state to the rest of the country.
Exactly. You really want to compare yourself regionally to see what's happening, because again, just like population, you're really looking at what you're capturing from the state perspective. There are national metrics. The Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of put some indexes out to help compare regions, not necessarily a community like a county to the nation, but more so the county to Colorado or the mountain range and things like that. So there are some additional indexes that federal administrations put together, as well as, again, looking back at the DOLA, the Department of Labor Affairs, they also put industries out.
Okay, thanks.
There are different things you can do. Like an example of what the county can do over time is do a thing called the shift share analysis. And shift share analysis, if there's a shift, let's say nationally in healthcare, in any given market, healthcare accommodates 15% of the employment market, all right? That's the shift nationally of healthcare, generally 15% of any given market in terms of employment. Let's say, what is your share of that market? Are you at 15%? Are you below? Are you at 15%? Are you above? So shift share is what is your share of a natural or national shift within a certain industry. So it's either city to region, region to county. It's always the smaller to the larger subset. And you're looking at, as an industry begins to shift, what is your share of that shift? Are you capturing it or not? A lot of people will move here, both people and industry, because they like the tax structure at the state. The mix of the tax structure, the mix of the quality of life, the environment, the recreation. They're like, I'm going to start a company and I'm moving to Colorado. Then your competition is other places in Colorado, not nationally. So if you begin to look at the different sectors and what your share is, and if you're beginning to see these regional or national shifts, how do you capture your share of that market? But the analysis is called shift share analysis. You can do it in any given sector as a way to sort of gauge how you're doing nationally or versus other regions in Colorado.
Madam Chair.
Sure.
So to that point, to what Ms. Barlow was saying, it seems to me that the existing conditions report you've given us doesn't have any of that economic information in there. Don't we need at least a snapshot of what the current labor force is made up in terms of, I've heard numbers that, the military accounts for about 30% of our local economic industry. So I would think we would need at least some snapshot of where we're at, where we think local development wants to take us in terms of the future workforce. Not that we necessarily want to influence that, but we do need to be able to plan for it and react to it. So don't we need some of that information, or did I miss that?
I think there is some on page 12.
Yeah, we do break down employment projections, current and future projections by sector. Residential, retail, industry, that's in here by sector. I don't know, Sean, if you can speak to it, if we have a thing that says currently right now, if this many people are employed, it's this percent military, this percent industry, this percent hospitality. I don't know if we have that percent breakdown relative to the county now versus relative to other places.
That's kind of what I was asking. What are the major
so
employers?
We've done it by sector. I don't know that we've done it as a composite by percent breakdown. Go ahead. I don't know if we have or not.
Yeah, I
It's
think,
page 12.
Yeah.
There is a breakdown of employment by industry within the county
there you go.
and how much it's changed in the last 10 years and what the projected change is likely to be. But what that doesn't tell us is, to me, it doesn't give us any indication of our vulnerability in certain sectors, because based on how we compare to other places in our diversity of population. No, diversity of employment, rather, sorry.
I don't know if there's a vulnerability index out there. Unless you're familiar with one, I'm not.
no, and vulnerability might not be the best word for it. I think you're asking to see if something changes immediately right now, what kind of a hit is that going to affect the employment base, correct?
Or also where we should be targeting our economic development to help diversify our economy more, and what implications then that has on our housing need, and because I think it's all tied together.
I think the key thing there to tie down the employment projections to housing is the salary range of the people when that expected industry or sector is going to grow. Looking at the medical industry per se, there's nurses, there's nurse techs, there's doctors, there's surgeons, there's hospital admin, pretty wide spectrum of, you might see an increase of 100,000 people in the healthcare sector over the next 10 years. What's that breakdown of typical healthcare salary, if you will, or to give you an idea of what kind of housing to need? I don't know, there's probably some market stuff out there for that. I might not be in here, and I don't know what it is offhand.
Right, and in that indication, you're kind of looking at occupational employment instead of industrial, and that's similar but different in that it's not as readily accessible for even a county-sized scale. States gather it, but it's again by a larger region, so you'd be looking at either the Colorado Springs metro area or the Pikes Peak region. So it wouldn't be a complete snapshot just for El Paso County. You'd be looking at a larger regional area, which is informative to an extent. Similarly, again, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a thing for state-based analysis, but not at a deep dive. So you can look at it and compare it like a percentage growth rate. The implications of that are that it's more generalized and it's less of an estimate and more of a guess at what some of that information looks at. And so looking at it by industry is more effective in terms of where growth is going, looking at a business side and what they provide in terms of employment opportunities instead of occupation basis.
We can take a look at we can look to see what's available out there for sector by income level. So again, see if there's anything out there that says if this sector is projected to grow by X number, what the breakdown is of that X number in terms of income. We can see.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I would also caution you from trying to guesstimate vulnerability. There are so many factors that go into downturns of various sectors, starting at the federal level in terms of regulatory change or policy, all the way through the state and even at the local level. So, I mean, I would caution you from trying to get too detailed into a vulnerability or emphasizing an industry over another, because as Mr. Halsey pointed out, if you're just targeting higher salaries, that leads to a handful of industries, and a downturn in any one of those industries can cause severe economic depression in a given area. So
Yeah, I don't think I was suggesting that we need to kind of focus that much on vulnerability. I was curious to know how vulnerable we are, but I don't think that needs to be part of the plan. And my concern is that we actually know it. The goal says continue to leverage the county's diverse employment base. And my question is, how diverse are we? Are we really that diverse? And do we need to diversify more? I suppose ultimately, and then how does that play into what our housing needs are like to be based on the sectors that we're likely to grow in?
So you'd like a little bit more of a diversity, an economic diversity index compared to other places?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think that one needs to be rewritten because
Yeah.
I can tell you we're not diverse enough.
Right.
I don't think we can ever
that's
be
my
too
feeling. That's why I
diverse.
asked the question. Yeah.
Right.
I think you're probably right. We'll see if we can't find a comparable index somewhere.
Okay, thanks.
We'll work in a lot of cities and we'll go over like the percentage of land use, like you're 65% single family, 12% commercial, and every community goes like, well, what should we be? And I'm like, It's different every single place. There is no right answer. So I think you want a robust and diverse local economy. I don't know what that index might be, but we'll see if we can't find something. And I think your housing thing is important to note. The one good thing is if we can make sure the plan says we need to accommodate that, you're not proactively going out there saying, we want housing in the $100,000 price point, and the $700,000 price point, and the $300,000 price point. If you make sure that you're able to accommodate those proposals as they come forward, those housing developers that come forward will respond to the market demand. And if there's a lot of white-collar jobs going up because a medical campus takes off, i.e. Anschutz and Aurora outside of Colorado, outside of Denver, then there's a lot of high income looking for high residential or whatever else. And if you've got industries that are beginning to grow that are more blue collar, maybe it's logistics or freight or warehouse, there isn't housing near there for that. What's going to be proposed is housing for that. So you want to make sure you provide that mix. The challenge is a lot of that housing mix get proposed when the market begins to unveil itself. So,
Madam Chair, what I would encourage the advisory committee to do is review the economic conditions report. It's just a little bit of light bedside reading, about 65 pages worth. I can testify to that because I was up till 11:30 reviewing it last night myself. But take a look at that and then go back and look at what is on the screen right now in terms of these policies and goals and see if they still make sense to you. We're not asking you to make uninformed decisions. This is kind of just getting you familiar with this next step of developing the plan. But take a look at the existing conditions report, provide us with comments on those, and then approach what's been presented today and see if these goals still make sense to you. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay.
But I've got a
65
question.
pages worth of sense?
I've got a question though about that. Are you looking for each of us individually to send you an email with, I did my analysis and I think this is a disconnect? Or I was going to ask the question to you to kind of walk us through the process that will take us from the existing conditions through the rest of the visioning, so you have what you need from us to take this the rest of the way.
sure. So again, the existing conditions report is something to be reviewed and absorbed. You're not going to get tested on it. There isn't always going to be a delinear like, well, this says that, so we have to do this. This is our starting point of understanding. This is so we're all have the same level of understanding and facts about the county. There's a lot of hearsay, a lot of anecdotal discussions, a lot of like, well, I didn't know that was the case, and we've heard a lot. This is sort of that level playing field of understanding as to what is truly going on. This is to be read and understood, not memorized. It's not, again, and just because we say something here was raised as an issue doesn't mean it has to have an actionable item in the plan. This is to provide a little bit of foundation so when we get into plan making, we know the county a little bit better. All right, that's what this is. We then have to start saying, okay, we now have a good understanding of all the different things we have to consider. It's a lot. It's a lot for anybody, okay? We've now talked to 3,400 people. We know what they think. That's a lot. What are the 10 things we're going to focus on? We can't do a zillion, all right? If you have a list of 500 goals, that's just a list, and no one's ever going to read it, all right? That's not a plan. This is a laundry list. So we've talked to a lot of people. We've done a ton of research. We sort of documented everything as a snapshot, take it in and say, okay, what are the 8 or 10 things we're going to categorically focus on? And within those, what are our top priorities? You can build a plan from that. This gets produced based off of talking to 3,500 people or 3,000 people and doing a ton of research over the course of a half a year or more. Then you have to distill all that and say, okay, this is a ton, granted. How do we begin to whittle this down into formulating a plan of action? The first thing is what is most important to us? What are the 8 or 10 areas we have to focus on for the county over the next 20 years? Then with each area of focus, what do we want to begin to identify underneath that is what we should be working on? That's where we are. From that, we can develop a plan.
I guess my question is a little more practically, how do we get there to provide that input to you? Because I've got some notes, I scribbled them down, I can hand them to you.
Bring them to the meeting on the 9th.
Right.
Which is a week from tomorrow.
Okay.
You can bring them in hard copy. If you want to email them to Mark, please, that guy, please do. If you just want to say page whatever, I have this comment. I mean, a lot of the existing conditions report kind of is what it is.
Right.
I mean, it's a fact-based report. There's not policies and goals in there that we're asking you to agree to, it kind of is what it is. So unless there's something that we've glaringly missed evaluating that you think will help inform the comprehensive plan, a lot of it's just going to be, tweaking a little bit here and there, or you missed this or whatever, which is frankly what staff's already doing. But if you have comments, just bring them next week. You can provide it in hard copy or email them to Mark. He loves getting emails.
But to answer your question, Tom, the best way is go through it on your own and sort of get your thoughts together, scribble your notes down, email them to Mark or not. But then at a meeting, be prepared to sort of go through it chapter by chapter and discuss it as a group. It's always the best way to go through. If you have a sounding board of other people, you might say, like, I didn't get this at all. And Ryan might say, well, he means this. Oh, that makes sense. Or like, yeah, I didn't get it either. Then you know you're not crazy and we need to work on something.
So our next meeting, we're going to be talking about the Black Forest Plan, obviously. So
Right.
I don't think there'll be a lot of time left over to talk about this. But what we can do is then kind of put them all together and then have that discussion at the next meeting after that. So if you can give them to us next week, my friend here can put them all together and we can have that conversation, but reserving next week to talk about the Black Forest Plan.
You need a meeting or two to go through this as a group. And that's expected. That's totally expected.
That's what I was hoping to get to, is so
Yeah.
we can figure
Yeah.
out
Yeah.
what next. We've
Yeah.
got a pretty good handle on the sub-area plans.
Right. Right.
That's been great, but we know we got a big one coming up.
Right.
And then what? If we can plan to, take a few weeks or however long
No,
to
you
work this.
you need
That's what I'm looking for.
a couple of meetings, a month, to go through this and the preliminary goals to get your heads around it so we can start developing that stuff. But there's a lot to get through and you got to work through it. There's no way except to just sort of jump in and work through it. But we wanted to sort of give you the springboard with which to get into it, and that's what this was meant to do. So
We only asked John and Mark to move mountains overnight, not you all.
Any more questions from the committee? No? Good. Anything else on the agenda?
I don't believe so. I think we were going to allow some time for public comment as we normally
I
do.
figured, yep.
So I think, so again, thanks for letting us go through a lot. But I think to get to Tom's comment, once you've had the next month or so to go through it as a group, we'll make any revisions necessary, tweak it, whatever. It'll still be a draft, but then that draft will have had the benefit of your input and discussion. We can make any changes, and then we can put it out to the public to begin to consume it or think about it. But we want to make sure we have your thorough commentary and review before we do that, and we're not in a rush to make that happen. So, all right?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So at this point, we're going to invite public comment specifically on the visions and goals that were discussed today. So let's focus it on these particular issues. If anybody has any comments on any of the draft goals or preliminary goals that were presented, please come up and say something.
Madam Chair, while they're deciding whether or not they want to talk, I just want to point out, this is not supposed to be easy.
No.
Okay? This is a hard process. There's a reason why we haven't done this in decades. It's hard. It's heavy lifting. And it's something that takes a lot of thought and a lot of time to get through. So be patient with us, understanding that we're still very high level. But it's not an easy process, so just hang in there.
And I do think that is the challenge, is to kind of take each step at a time and not try to jump to the detail too soon. So we will discuss this then, not at our next meeting, but the meeting after that.
And it may take a couple meetings.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we're committed to taking as long as it takes to get through whatever comments you may have. Just want to thank the committee for stepping up and now doing what seems to be weekly meetings. Sorry about that, but also those that in attendance, including the Planning Commission. It's important to keep them informed of the process. I have asked Mr. Housiel to do a report to the Board of County Commissioners on the existing conditions report once we're able to finalize that, so that they can be informed as to kind of what we're dealing with, where we are today, and why we need to adjust how we approach things moving forward. So look for that to happen, as well as a presentation to the Planning Commission if needed as well.
I just have one final question. Are we still on schedule?
Yes.
Good.
I think the key thing is what you said, Madam Chair, and that is we want to take that, do it right, make sure we have how did we get here? So you're exactly right. We do incrementally make sure.
And for those on the committee, we still yet this week will be providing you with our review of the Black Forest Plan, either tomorrow, Mark, or Thursday. He's saying probably Thursday. It sounds like Mark.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll expect it on Thursday then.
Thank you all.
Okay, I think that's the meeting adjourned. Thank you everybody for coming.